Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm gonna be looking at currently going on tournament. That is the second leg of the Grand Chess Tour that's being held in Paris, France. This is a Rapid and Blitz tournament, 2021 Grand Chess Tour, second leg, and it's being held between the 16th through the 22nd of June, 2021. This year's second leg of the Grand Chess Tour has attracted 10 allied grandmasters in a Rapid and Blitz chess tournament, and the total prize fund is 150,000 US dollars. The time control for the Rapid is 25 minutes for the whole game with a 10-second increment from move on, and the time control for Blitz is a 5 minutes for the whole game with a 2-second increment from move on. For day 1, day 2, and day 3, we will have the Rapid games, and then day 4 and day 5 we'll have the Blitz, and then on day 5 we'll have also the playoffs, so as to conclude with the winner. Round 1 had some interesting pairings, and I'll also be able to tell you the number of GMs, the name of the GMs who are participating in this, the 10 allied grandmasters. Board 1 we had GM Alireza Firouzja, weighing in with a rapid rating of 27.03 rating, taking on Wesley from the United States of America, who has 27.41. Board 2 we had Peter Shevdila from Russia, versing GM MVL, that's Maxime Lagrave Fischer from France, who is the highest rated player in this tournament with a 2960 rapid rating. That's way high up there. Board 3 we had Tamir Rajabov, the #1 grandmaster from Azerbaijan, taking on GM Levon Aronian from Armenia. We had Fabiano Caruana, the #1 GM from America, United States of America. He's an Italian-born grandmaster but raised in America. He's from Miami, Florida. Florida being his home state. He enjoys the Sunshine State. And he was on board 4, taking on GM Ian Nepomniachtchi from Russia. That's the #1 GM from Russia, who also happens to be the winner of the candidates, and he will be taking on Magnus Carlsen in the World Chess Championship to see who crowns as champion for this year. Board 5, we had Etienne Bocret from France taking on Richard Rapport from Hungary. So a couple of interesting games here, and this is just round 1. So I'll be going through all the games. Make sure you follow my channel and subscribe to my channel so you can be able to see all the other interesting games. For now, I chose to start with board 1. That's a game between Wesley and Alireza having the white pieces and Wesley on black. Alireza with the white pieces started the game with e4, and Wesley replied with e5. That's always Wesley's game in response actually to e4 while he's in black. We had knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, more of the Italian game. We had bishop c5, c3 to try and reinforce the center. You want to push d4 immediately to strike into the center. So we had knight f6, d3, d6, bishop g5. Now what this bishop does is it creates a pin. It creates a pin onto this knight, and it has to be kicked away, perhaps by playing s6 followed by f5 when it draws back to here, and then it would come here. Yeah, it has to leave, otherwise you will not utilize that knight, the knight on f6. So here s6 is played, bishop h4 and f5. Now what f5 does is it prevents white from playing to this square, having the bishop in this knight, but that's not really necessary because I don't think Alireza would want to lift the same piece twice in the opening without it being, you know, evicted from this square. So, but it's a destructive move. Sometimes GMs play the side moves, side lines, and this is how psychologically Alireza also played an inaccuracy. He then played f4, and yet the game would have easily continued by having knight b to d2. Let's just take it back. Knight b, this knight to b2 should have been the move. That way, maybe the game would continue normally, and you would have black not equalizing, just like that. And that's okay. All sides castle, then f4 trying to get space on the queen side, bishop e6 challenging the bishop, rook e1, bishop draws back to a7, but that wasn't played. F4 was the move that was played. We had then a7, rather bishop a7. White Alireza, who is Alireza, castles the king side. Queen e7. We have now knight b to d2, g5 to kick away the bishop. Bishop draws back to g3. Knight a7, very typical of Wesley. So what he wants right now, he loves to maneuver this knight from g to f6 back to h7, then to f8, and perhaps to g3, or even to e6. This is actually g6, but to e6, that's a good maneuver and very typical of his type of play. He's won lots and lots of games that way with Wesley's type of play. So the game continued. We had b4, knight f8 as anticipated. d4, he's on the move, an assault on the center. Knight g6. He decides that the knight should go to g6 rather than e6. b5, we have knight moving away to f5. h3 is thrown in by Alireza. We have h5. Now, what this move did is create a flight square for this bishop to draw back here once it's evicted by f4. We had now bishop d5. We have bishop b6, and now Alireza played an inaccuracy by playing queen to b1. Best should have been c4, and perhaps g4 would be played in. Yeah, but that didn't happen. So he played an inaccuracy by queen. Yeah, he struck immediately by having g4. We had h times g4. I think best should have been a times b4 first, but he knows how he's playing his stuff. So after g4, we had h times g4, h times g4 as well. Here Wesley recaptures with the h pawn, and knight draws back to h2. We then had queen g5, and a mistake is played where we had Alireza playing queen d3. Best should have been queen a2, and perhaps the game would continue this way. You don't give away an advantage to Wesley to increase the advantage. By playing queen d3, you gave him a 2-point lead almost, but playing queen a2 would have been the best move. That way would have rook h7. Perhaps the game would continue that way, and we would have a relatively okay game, an equal game almost that way. Yeah, but that didn't happen. So after queen d3, we had a knight coming to f5. Yeah, knight f4 was on the board. We had queen moving out of the way of the knight. That's queen e2. Now, this queen e2 move makes the black queen hung, so it has to be protected. And drawing back to h6. But perhaps maybe drawing back elsewhere would have been good, but this is a good move. That way, you're going to have this knight attack the bishop from here to be attacking this. And this knight will be almost hanging if you recapture with any piece, or perhaps even a mate down here. Alireza has seen all this, and he's not about to fall for that antique. So he plays his rook f to e1 to create more space and a square for the king. Once that happens, now that's when an naturalist was played by Wesley. So by playing f6, best should have been bishop e6 to challenge that bishop and maybe build capture on a6. But it was inaccuracy after inaccuracy. After Wesley played f6 as an inaccuracy, Alireza replied with another inaccuracy by playing bishop uh, c4. Uh, Best should have been knight d to f1, you know, and perhaps, Wesley would play king to d8. But anyway, bishop c4 was played, and knight h5. And this is when, again, Alireza played a blunder. Ideally, moving away, best is you should be able to capture this queen. This is like a golden opportunity. Capture the queen and take out this threat on this build open fire. Alireza did not play this. Instead, he played another inaccuracy of playing knight h to f1. You know, let's see how the game proceeds. But perhaps if he had played, you know, queen capturing on h6, rook would recapture back. Then you would now play your knight, and the game would continue. Yes, black has an advantage, but not substantial enough to win the game, and you play on. Yeah. So, but this is how the game continued. After playing rook h2, f1, we had bishop. A big mistake by Wesley. He plays bishop d7. Best should have been queen times. Best should have been rather knight. This knight to f4. Let's look at that variation. If we take it back, best should have been knight to f4. That way, this would give you still have you maintain your advantage, and the game would perhaps continue like this. You'd substantially increase your advantage. Yes, this is a very good bishop move. It gets the rook out of position by playing it back to the back rank, but that would continue. But he played bishop f4. After bishop d7, he plays bishop h4, and that way we now have queen h5 is on the move. Queen h5 is on the move. We had a b capturing a6. B recaptures back on a6, and then bishop d5. We have rook b8, which is a very big mistake. Best should have been a knight check. This knight checking the king right here would have been a much better move. So we have the king move up here. Just to show you how that would be done. This is how you check. You have the king moving up there, but that didn't happen. So he instead played rook b8. We had g capturing on f4, queen capturing on h4. We had knight g3, bishop s7, knight d to f1 to just bring more minor pieces around the white king. King e7. Now that's a mistake. Best should have been knight c6, and perhaps the rook on a would challenge the one in the b file, but that didn't happen, so he played king e7, and we had f capturing e5. F recaptures back on e5, and then a check is thrown in. Now what this check does, it forks the queen and king, but at this point you have the bishop to rely on, so you have to let go of the white bishop and capture back this knight. We had e recapturing on f5, c6, kicking away the bishop. Bishop draws back to g2 to maintain this bishop on this diagonal. It's a defensive bishop well as an attacking bishop as well. It's such a vital bishop. We had now knight c4. Queen attacks the knight by having queen d3. We had the knight being protected by d5, and then a blunder was played by Alireza. He sacked the rook. Rook times e5. The rook capturing on e5 is such a blunder. Best should have been, rook a2 and perhaps king f8. By him doing that, Wesley took a very short time and he recaptured with a knight. That's more like a gap. We had rook pinning that knight to the king on e1. You don't want to recapture with the pawn immediately, because then you would be opening up this diagonal. Just so I can show you that if you recapture here, you're having your f2 so vulnerable and weak, because this queen is looking at it. So best is bring this rook, pin the knight, and then recapture with the rook here. So rook e1 was played. We had a king moving out, which is a very, very big blunder by Wesley. Best should have been rook b2, putting more pressure on f2, and perhaps the game would continue this way. That would still have him maintain his advantage, but once he moved out of the way with the king, the game was now equal. He squandered his advantage. So we had king f7, and then Alireza captured an e5, rook b2, we had the rook challenging the second file, rook by rook e2. We had now a blunder. Well, you can call it unnatural, it's a rook b6, but this starts to give the minor advantages to Alireza. So it's an inaccuracy. We had f6, which is another inaccuracy by Alireza, but yeah. So then we had bishop b8. Looking at this whole diagonal, this is a very useful bishop. It now comes to life, and looking at that, that's a very vulnerable square. So we then had queen f5. Bishop checks on h2. Knight picks on h2. Even if you do check, this is a very useful bishop right here, that it does defend this h1 square, so the king just moves out of the way, and the h1 square is not available for the queen to do the mate. What happens is we had rook b7, which is a very huge blunder. At this point, the game is almost lost, and Alireza should have won the game immediately from here by having to play queen queen e6 check. He did not play that though. What happens is best for Wesley. So we had Wesley play rook b7. That is a very immense blunder. It's so huge that it gives Alireza a 10-point lead, and perhaps Alireza should have just continued with this line. He did play a different move whereby he thought this rook was hanging, and he thought by capturing with a bishop right here. Let me just show you that. This is what he played, and it came to my mind. Maybe because of time trouble, he thought he would capture that and have this capturing. Then he captures here, so he would be forking the king, and then the rook. Have the rook fall. But that no need to play such. At this point, a check in the game is always a very good move, like Bobby Fischer says it. Uh, so he should have played, Queen E6 check to maintain that 10-point lead. And, the game would continue this way, perhaps. You would have him picking up all these pawns and planning to do the mate. At this point, the queen has fallen. You know, you have the game at your disposal, and this is like a mate in nine. But what happens is he played uh, bishop times d5 right there to try and go after the rook. He Wesley recaptured, and he recaptured with a queen. Queen capturing on d5 check. King g6. We have a queen e4 check. King captures on f6, which is a blunder. Best should have been king g5. But then we have queen checking him on c6. King g5 then. Then we have rook e5 check. That move was bad. That's a blunder. Best should have been queen d5 check. Let's just take it back. Queen d5 check should have been the move that tries to maintain the huge advantage. Instead, he played rook e5 check, and Wesley so happily captured this rook. Since he was already a piece up, he recaptured this. We had E recapturing on D, recapturing on E5, and rook F7, which is another blunder by Wesley. Best should have been rook B1 check, so the game would continue this way. There you have some bit of equality, and here is the game is draw. He really has nothing to do, even if he has a queen on. You have the game has the draw game here basically. However, he played this, and Alireza played e6. Alireza played e6. Then Wesley played another mistake by playing rook f6. Best should have been rook f5, so you can have a queen d7. Yeah, but after having played that, we had queen d7 immediately by Alireza, and we had a pile of the rooks on the f file. This gives the advantage to white, but here Alireza played another blunder by playing queen g7 check. Best should have been the queen checking from this diagonal. This diagonal right here should have been better to check from here rather than here, so as to maintain the huge advantage. Yeah, checking from here gives you uh, good access and entry to the king. Just so we can see that queen d2. If we go back to here, queen d2 check, that maintains the advantage, and the game perhaps would continue this way. The game would continue that way. We have, it's a good game for white. This is really one for white. But he played queen g7, and in this moment, Wesley replied with another huge mistake. This is a blunder as well. Best should have been king f5, but he played king h4. So we had e7. Then he captured the pawn on f2 check. King moves out of the way to e1. Rook f1 check. King e2. Then we had the rook on 1 to f2 check. King f3. Now king e3 rather was a blunder. We should have played king to this square. That's the d1 square actually. d1 or d3 is just okay, because then the king gets to have a maneuver. Let's just show you that. If you play here, then the king gets to have a route, to go hide. Yeah, to go hide that way. Yeah, so here the king would not escape. He played that, and we had, the game back to almost, a draw. So we had rook 2 to f3 check. We had king e4, and then rook e8. We had a blunder played by Alireza. That's the queen h6 check move. That was a big mistake. Best should have been king d5. You have the king crawl towards this pawn, king come from here to here or to here next to the pawn, so you can be able to make this other black rook uncomfortable. He instead played, rook. Yeah, and the game perhaps would continue this way, that way. You have a good game here. And this is good enough for white to win. He did not play that though, so he played queen h6 check, and then we had king g3. We had queen checking on d6, king f2, queen d2 check, king g3. That's another blunder. Best should have been king f1. Yeah. Nonetheless, in the game we had king g3, and at that point, Alireza played another mistake by checking on d6. We had best should have been queen d7 to attack this rook and have some slight winning advantage, and perhaps the game would continue this way. The game would continue that way. That would give him some kind of advantage, not substantial enough to win the game, but so he played queen d6 check, and we had Wesley playing king h3, which is another mistake. King f2 would have been the best move, but the game continued. Queen d7, he now says it. Rook f to f8 to give protection. Now you cannot capture this. You cannot capture this rook because this pawn is under pin. Yeah, so he pushes another pawn, and we have king h4. Now that is a very huge mistake, and again Alireza should have capitalized on this because this gives white a 5-point lead. King h2 would have been best for Wesley. Instead he played queen h4, and that way Alireza played another blunder. Best he would have played queen now e6 with the rook g8, and he would still maintain his advantage. Instead he played king d5, and the game continued. Rook g8, and at this point it was almost drawish. We had a king crawling towards the queening, the crowning pawn, and we had another pawn being pushed by Wesley, so the g pawn is also running down the file to crown. We had a check being thrown in so as to have that pawn being put at bay. The pawn is pinned, king h2, and then that's when the perpetual start. Perpetual, and this was a draw. At this point, the game was declared a draw. Thank you. I'll be going through all the other games for the round, so keep to my channel. Please subscribe just so you can be able to watch all games in this tournament. It's a marathon. Let's see who crowns as champion in France in this second leg of the Grand Chess Tour.